The planet was quiet, as if it had been holding its breath for years. The stars above glowed faintly in the distance, hidden behind clouds of dust and gas. The only sounds that filled the air were the hum of the engines on the small human shuttle and the occasional static crackle from the communication system. Inside, Captain Rafe Holden leaned back in his seat, watching the dim lights of the shuttle flicker as the craft made its way through the thick atmosphere of the alien world. His eyes were tired, the weight of years of battle and endless missions hanging on his shoulders. He had seen death, destruction, and despair more times than he could count. Yet something about this mission felt different. Rafe's thoughts were interrupted by the voice of his commanding officer, Commander Dorian. "Captain, we're nearing the landing zone. You ready?" Rafe straightened up, his hand instinctively resting on the hilt of the energy sword strapped to his side. "Ready as I'll ever be." The mission was simple, at least on paper. The human race had long been in conflict with the Relari, a race of towering insectoid beings who had been trapped in a war with the Vraxians, a much stronger alien species. Humans had been offering aid to the Relari in secret, a small but determined group of resistance fighters. The goal today was to rescue Queen Zarathiz, the leader of the Relari, who had been captured by the Vraxians during an ambush. Rafe had read about Zarathiz. She was fierce, known for her tactical brilliance and her unwillingness to compromise. Her people viewed her as a goddess, someone who could turn the tide of the war, but Rafe had never met her. The humans who had dealt with her in the past described her as cold and calculating, a ruler who saw everything as a game of survival. But Rafe knew that saving her could change the course of the war. He had no choice but to succeed. The shuttle touched down with a soft thud. Rafe's boots hit the ground, the dirt kicking up slightly as he surveyed the area. It was eerily quiet with no sign of the Vraxians or their patrols. "Stay sharp," he muttered to his team. He and his squad moved quickly, weaving between the tall, jagged rocks that dotted the landscape. The air smelled faintly of sulfur, and the ground beneath their feet was uneven. As they neared the Vraxian stronghold, Rafe's heart raced. This wasn't just another rescue mission. This was about turning the tide of a war. The entrance to the stronghold was heavily guarded, but Rafe had studied the layout. He signaled to his team, and they split up, moving into position. They were professionals, trained to move like shadows, unnoticed and unheard. They reached the door with no resistance, slipping inside with ease. Inside, the stronghold was cold, its metal walls reflecting the faint light of the distant stars. It was a stark contrast to the natural beauty outside, a place built for war, not life. Rafe and his team moved through the halls, silent as ghosts, until they reached the holding cells. There, in the deepest part of the facility, they found her. Zarathiz stood tall, her insectoid body casting a long shadow across the room. Her wings, iridescent and delicate, shimmered in the dim light. Her green, chitinous exoskeleton glinted as she turned toward them. Her eyes, large and reflective, studied Rafe with an intensity that made him feel like she could see straight through him. "Human," she said, her voice low and filled with a strange mix of curiosity and disdain. "You dare enter my prison?" Rafe stepped forward, unflinching. "We're here to free you, Your Majesty," he said, his voice steady. "The Vraxians won't have you for long." For a moment, Zarathiz simply stared at him, her gaze unwavering. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, she extended one of her long, multi-jointed arms through the bars of the cell, offering a hand. "You're brave to come here, human, but you're also foolish. This place is cursed." Rafe hesitated, but then reached out and grasped her hand. The moment his fingers touched her skin, he felt a surge of electricity, a tingling sensation that shot up his arm. His heart skipped a beat as he quickly pulled his hand back. Zarathiz smirked. "I see you are not like the others. You feel it too," Rafe frowned. "Feel what?" "The connection," she said simply. "The pull between our kinds. It is strange, isn't it, that despite all our differences, we are drawn to each other." Rafe was about to respond when a loud crash echoed through the hall. The Vraxians had discovered their presence. "Time to go," Rafe said, his voice urgent. He motioned to his team, signaling them to move, but Zarathiz did not budge. "I will not be freed by a human," she said, her voice cold again. "You may try, but I will not bow to you." Rafe, taken aback by her words, tried to reason with her. "We're not here to make you bow, Zarathiz. We're here to help you. The Vraxians are coming, and we need to leave now." But Zarathiz simply turned away, her wings fluttering slightly as if to signal her indifference. "Then you will die with me?" Rafe's pulse quickened. The Vraxians were closing in fast. He didn't have time to argue. "I'm not leaving without you," he said firmly, moving toward the cell bars. Before Zarathis could respond, Rafe pulled out a small device from his belt. With a few quick movements, he activated it and the cell door hissed open. "Let's go." Zarathis finally glanced at him, her eyes narrowing. "You defy me, human. You think you can just take me from my people?" Rafe didn't have an answer, but the urgency of the moment didn't allow for more words. He grabbed her arm and pulled her to her feet. "You'll thank me later. Right now, we need to survive." They rushed through the hallways, the sounds of Vraxian soldiers echoing in the distance. Rafe could feel the heat rising in his chest, the adrenaline pumping through his veins. As they neared the exit, the doors slammed open, and Vraxian soldiers stormed in, guns raised. Rafe's team opened fire, the energy blasts lighting up the dark hall. But the Vraxians were strong, and the firefight quickly escalated. Rafe pushed Zarathis toward the shuttle as he fired his weapon at the oncoming enemies. His heart pounded in his chest as he held the line. "Go! Get to the shuttle!" he yelled to his team. Zarathis hesitated for a moment, her eyes narrowing as if considering whether to leave or stay. Rafe looked back, meeting her gaze. In that brief moment, something unspoken passed between them. She didn't move at first, but then, with a slight flick of her wings, she darted forward, her strength unmatched. She leaped past the Vraxians, taking out several in a flash, before finally making it to the shuttle. Rafe followed close behind, barely escaping the onslaught. As the shuttle doors closed, he couldn't help but feel a strange sense of victory. They had made it. They had her. But as the shuttle ascended into the sky, he glanced over at Zarathis. She was silent, her eyes distant, and for the first time since the mission began, Rafe felt the weight of her presence. He had saved her, but the real battle was just beginning. Zarathis, the mighty queen, had a past with humans, one that she had kept hidden for years. The truth, Rafe realized, was far more complicated than a simple rescue mission. He had saved her once, and now it seemed the galaxy might have just saved him. The shuttle soared through the stars, leaving the planet behind in a cloud of dust and debris. Inside, the tension was thick, heavier than the silence that filled the cramped interior. Rafe sat near the controls, his fingers tense on the console as he looked at the blinking lights indicating their course. Behind him, Zarathis stood in quiet contemplation, her eyes focused on the stars outside the window. Rafe had been on countless missions, and he had rescued people before, lives saved, worlds freed, but nothing compared to the weight of this moment. There was something about Zarathis, something in the way she carried herself, a mixture of pride and vulnerability that stirred something deep within him. She was a queen, a ruler of a dying species, but she was also a woman who had been through more than anyone could understand. As the minutes passed, Rafe couldn't help but feel that there was more to Zarathis than she had let on. Her initial distrust of him, her refusal to speak about her past, it all pointed to something deeper, something hidden. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Zarathis spoke, her voice low and filled with an intensity that Rafe couldn't ignore. "Do you know, human," she began, her words thick with emotion, "that I have not always been a queen?" Rafe turned his head slightly, glancing at her. "I don't know much about your past," he admitted, his voice gentle, "but I'd like to understand." Zarathis' eyes flickered with something, anger, regret, maybe even pain, but she didn't say anything at first. Instead, she moved to one of the nearby seats, sitting down slowly, as if the weight of the conversation was too much to bear. She looked at him, her gaze unwavering. "I was once just a child," she said, her voice quieter now, as if the words themselves held the weight of the universe. "I was born on a world far from here in a place where my people were scattered and weak. We lived in the shadows, hunted by enemies we could not defeat. My father, the former king, was a great warrior, but even he could not protect us from the Vraxians." Rafe remained silent, watching her, unsure of what to say. It was rare for someone like her to share such personal things. For someone so strong, so full of pride, to reveal a weakness, it was almost unheard of. "My father died when I was young," Zarathis continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "I remember the day like it was yesterday. The sky was dark and the ground trembled beneath us as the Vraxians came. They killed him in front of me and I was helpless." Her voice broke slightly, the emotion raw and real. Rafe could feel the pain in her words, and his heart tightened in sympathy. This was a side of Zarathis he had never seen before. She wasn't just a queen, she was a survivor just like him. I remember the humans who came to our aid that day, Zarathis said, her eyes distant, as if she were looking through the years to another time. They were different from the others. They didn't look at us like we were enemies. They didn't see us as just a conquest to be won. They fought alongside us, risking their lives for a race they didn't even know. Rafe blinked, his heart pounding in his chest. He hadn't expected this. He had never known the full story of the Relari, but now, standing there in the shuttle with Zarathis, everything began to click. The connection, the reason she had been so guarded. The reason she seemed to have an odd sense of familiarity when she looked at him. That human, she continued, her voice trembling, was the one who saved me. He came for me when no one else would. He carried me out of the battlefield just like you did today. He was the first human I ever trusted. Rafe felt a sudden shock run through him. He turned to face her fully, his mind racing. What do you mean? Zarathis looked at him, her eyes narrowing as if measuring his every word. The man who saved me was you. The words hit Rafe like a thunderbolt, and for a moment he couldn't speak. He stared at her, his mind struggling to process what she had just said. That can't be, I don't remember that. Zarathis nodded slowly. You wouldn't, you were younger and I never told anyone about that day, but I never forgot you, human. I couldn't. You saved me and you left. And now here you are saving me again, twice in one lifetime. Rafe's heart raced and a strange mix of emotions flooded him. Confusion, disbelief, something else. A deep connection, something beyond what he had ever expected to find. How could he have saved her all those years ago? How could he have forgotten her? You remember me? He asked, his voice barely more than a whisper. Why didn't you say something sooner? Zarathis looked down at her hands, her fingers twitching as if caught between two worlds. I didn't know what to say. You were just a soldier. I was just a child. We were from different worlds, different lives. I couldn't risk it. But you trusted me, Rafe said, his voice filled with wonder. Back then you trusted me, she nodded slowly. I did, and I still do. Her eyes met his then, filled with something he couldn't name. But I have to know something, human. Why did you come for me now? Why risk everything to save me again? Rafe didn't hesitate. Because you're worth saving, he said simply. I've seen what you're capable of, what your people are capable of. I know you've been through hell, and I know you're not the same person you were back then. But I believe in you. I believe you can help us win this war. Zarathis looked at him, her expression softening. You don't understand, human. The Relari are not the same. We've lost so much. Our people are scattered. We are dying. There is no hope left. Rafe stepped forward, his hand reaching out to gently touch her arm. There is always hope, Zarathis. As long as there's breath in our bodies, there's always hope. For a long moment, Zarathis said nothing. Her eyes searched his face as if weighing his words, trying to decide if she could trust him. Slowly, she nodded. I think you might be right, she said quietly. I think there is still hope. But before they could say anything more, the shuttle's systems hummed to life. The alert lights flashed, signaling that they were nearing the human fleet. Zarathis stood up, her wings fluttering slightly as she straightened. We must prepare. The Vraxians will be relentless. They will not stop until we are destroyed. Rafe nodded, his heart still racing from the revelation. Then we fight, together. As they moved toward the shuttle's exit, ready for whatever came next, Rafe couldn't help but feel a strange sense of pride. The woman standing beside him wasn't just a queen. She wasn't just a warrior. She was someone who had been through the fires of war, who had seen the worst of the galaxy, and yet here she was, fighting for survival. And he would fight for her. For them. For the future they could build together. The battle raged on outside the shuttle, but inside, Rafe and Zarathis stood silently, preparing for what was to come. The human fleet had arrived just in time, their ships positioning themselves in a defensive line around the planet. The Vraxians were closing in, their forces relentless and vast. It was a war that had been fought for years, but now everything was about to change. Zarathis stood near the shuttle's window, her wings unfurled, her body tense. The war had been a part of her life for so long that she could no longer remember a time when there had been peace. The thought of victory felt almost impossible, yet here she was, surrounded by humans, the same species she had once thought of as enemies. And yet Rafe had changed everything. He had shown her something she had lost long ago, hope. Rafe walked up beside her, his eyes scanning the chaotic scene outside. The Vraxians were making their move, but the humans weren't backing down. They had been preparing for this moment for years, and now they were ready to fight. "It's time," Rafe said, his voice steady. "We can't wait any longer, the fleet's here and we have to strike." Zarathis turned to face him, her gaze intense. "You don't understand. This is not just about fighting, it's about survival. The Vraxians will not stop. They will keep coming, and even if we win today, the war will never end unless we destroy their leadership." Rafe met her gaze, his eyes filled with resolve. "Then we destroy them together. We've been fighting for too long to stop now." Zarathis studied him for a moment, her mind racing. The human before her was so different from the one she had known in the past. He wasn't just a soldier, he was a leader. He had an unwavering belief in victory, in the possibility of a future where the Relari could live without fear. It was a future that Zarathis hadn't allowed herself to dream of in years, but now, with Rafe at her side, it seemed possible. "We'll need a plan," Zarathis said, her voice calm but firm. "The Vraxian leadership is entrenched on the capital ship. It's heavily guarded and we'll need to breach it before we can do any real damage." Rafe nodded. "We'll handle the ground assault. You'll lead the attack on the capital ship. I'm not going to let you do this alone." Zarathis looked at him, a flicker of surprise crossing her features. She had expected him to argue, to try to protect her, but instead he stood beside her as an equal. She knew she couldn't ask him to stay behind. She didn't want him to, not now. "I will lead the assault, but we must move quickly," Zarathis said. "The longer we wait, the more lives will be lost." With a silent nod, Rafe turned to gather the others. Zarathis stayed by the window for a moment longer, watching the scene unfold. The Vraxians were powerful, their warships intimidating, but she had something they didn't, an army willing to fight and die for something greater than themselves. And now, with the humans by her side, she felt a surge of strength that she had not felt in years. The shuttle's door slid open, and Rafe stepped back in, leading the team of soldiers who would accompany Zarathis. They were human, but they followed her without hesitation, their loyalty a quiet but undeniable force. Zarathis turned to face them, her eyes sharp. "This is it," she said, her voice commanding. "We fight to win, not just to survive. Our people depend on us. Let's show the Vraxians what we're capable of." The soldiers nodded, and together they moved toward the exit of the shuttle, their boots pounding against the metal floor. The mission was simple: infiltrate the Vraxian capital ship, eliminate their leadership, and cripple their forces. But nothing about it felt simple. It felt like a final stand, like everything that had led them here had been building to this moment. As they boarded the transport ships, the air was thick with anticipation. Rafe stood beside Zarathis, his eyes scanning the group of soldiers. They were all in this together now. The humans and the Relari had become something new, something stronger than they had been apart. The transport ships took off, cutting through the atmosphere and into the vastness of space. Zarathis sat in silence, her mind focused on the task ahead. The Vraxians were a formidable foe, but she had never been one to back down from a fight. She had seen what the humans were capable of, and she knew that with Rafe by her side, they had a chance. The journey to the capital ship felt like an eternity, but when they arrived, the reality of the situation hit them all at once. The ship was massive, its dark hull towering over them. The Vraxian forces were already prepared for battle, their warships circling the capital ship in a tight defensive formation. Rafe turned to Zarathis, his face serious. "We'll hit them hard and fast. We can't give them a chance to regroup." Zarathis nodded. "Agreed. We'll breach the main hangar, disable their defenses, and move in." The transport ships dove toward the capital ship, their engines roaring as they cut through the void. As they neared the hangar bay, the Vraxians opened fire, their weapons lighting up the darkness. The transport ships shuddered under the barrage, but they held steady, their shields absorbing the worst of the attack. With a final burst of speed, the ship slammed into the hangar, the doors crashing open as the soldiers poured out. The battle was on. Rafe and Zarathis led the charge, their weapons blazing as they tore through the Vraxian soldiers. The human soldiers moved with precision, their training evident in every move. The Relari, too, fought with unmatched ferocity, their alien strength a terrifying sight as they cut down their enemies. Zarathis moved through the chaos with a calm determination, her wings flaring as she struck down Vraxians left and right. She was a force of nature, unstoppable and relentless. Rafe fought by her side, his energy sword cutting through the enemies with deadly efficiency. Together, they carved a path through the hangar, their soldiers following in their wake. But even as they pushed forward, Zarathis couldn't shake the feeling that the Vraxians were just the beginning. The real battle, the true test, would come when they reached the Vraxian leadership. "Keep pushing forward," Rafe shouted, his voice cutting through the noise. "We're almost there." Zarathis nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. They were close. She could feel it. The leadership was just ahead, their fortified position waiting for them. But there was no turning back now. They had come too far to stop. As they reached the final set of doors, Zarathis paused for a moment, her breath steady despite the intensity of the battle. She turned to Rafe, her eyes locking with his. "Are you ready?" she asked, her voice steady but filled with anticipation. Rafe met her gaze, his expression unwavering. "Ready as I'll ever be." With that, they pushed through the doors into the heart of the Vraxian stronghold. The room beyond was massive, a cavernous chamber filled with Vraxian soldiers and their leaders. The Vraxian general stood at the far end, his towering form a symbol of their power. But Zarathis and Rafe didn't hesitate. Together, they charged forward, cutting through the Vraxians like a storm. The battle that followed was brutal, the clash of weapons echoing through the chamber. But Zarathis fought with a fierce determination, her heart focused on one thing: victory. She was no longer the queen of a dying species. She was the leader of something new, something powerful. She was fighting for a future, and with Rafe by her side, nothing could stop them. The Vraxian general finally fell, his body crashing to the floor with a thunderous roar. The battle was over, the leadership had been destroyed, but Zarathis didn't feel the victory she had expected. Instead, she felt a sense of finality. The war wasn't over, but they had taken the first step toward ending it. The humans and the Relari had become something more than allies. They had become a new force in the galaxy. Together, they had forged a bond that nothing could break. Rafe stood beside her, his expression filled with quiet pride. "We did it," he said softly. Zarathis looked at him, her heart filled with gratitude and something deeper. "Yes, we did." And for the first time in years, Zarathis allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, there was hope for the future. With Rafe by her side, they had proven that no force in the galaxy could stand against the strength of their bond. The war had reached its breaking point. The Vraxian Empire, once an unstoppable force in the galaxy, was on the brink of collapse. Their leadership had been decimated, their capital ship destroyed, and their forces scattered. The humans and Relari, once sworn enemies, now stood side by side, bound by a common cause. Together, they had proven that they could overcome even the most insurmountable odds. Yet, as Zarathis watched the stars from the bridge of the human flagship, she knew that the war was not truly over. The Vraxians may have lost their leadership, but their empire was vast, and their desire for revenge would not fade so easily. The galaxy was still in turmoil, and the peace they had fought for was fragile, like a delicate thread ready to snap at any moment. Rafe stood beside her, his eyes scanning the vast expanse of space. The two of them had come a long way since that first, fateful encounter. He had saved her once again, but now they faced a new challenge, one that would require more than just strength or strategy. They needed something that neither the Vraxians nor the Relari could have predicted: unity. "We've won the battle, but the war isn't over," Zarathis said, her voice steady, though the weight of her words was not lost on Rafe. "I know," Rafe replied. "We've got to secure the future. The Vraxians may be broken, but they're not gone. They'll regroup, they'll strike again. We need to be ready." Zarathis turned to face him, her wings folded tightly against her back. "And what do you suggest? We've dealt a devastating blow to their military, but the galaxy is still a battlefield. How do we ensure this doesn't happen again?" Rafe hesitated, then stepped closer, his gaze unwavering. "We need to unite the galaxy, not just the humans and Relari. We need to bring together every species, every race, every faction that's been pushed to the margins by the Vraxian Empire. We need to build a new coalition, one based on trust, on shared goals." Zarathis' expression softened. "You think they'll listen?" "I think they have no choice," Rafe said. "The Vraxians were a threat to everyone. Now that they're falling, it's up to us to fill the void. To make sure no one else rises up to take their place." Zarathis nodded slowly. "You're right, but it will take time. There are many who have suffered at the hands of the Vraxians, and trust is not easily earned." "I know," Rafe said, his voice soft but firm. "But we have to try. If we don't, then everything we've fought for, everything we've lost, will be for nothing." The silence between them stretched, but it was a comfortable silence, filled with the unspoken understanding that had grown between them over the course of the war. Zarathis had once seen humans as a plague on the galaxy, but now, with Rafe at her side, she saw something different. She saw strength, loyalty, and the potential for change. "We've done the impossible," Zarathis said softly, "but the real test is yet to come. We must convince others that we are not just victors in this war, but leaders of the future." Rafe smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile. "We'll do it together, you and me. I believe in you, Zarathis, and I know you believe in us in humanity. Together we can lead the galaxy into a new age." Zarathis looked at him for a long moment, her gaze unwavering. "I never thought I would say this, but I believe in you too, Rafe." The words hung in the air, a declaration that had taken a lifetime to form. The distance between them, once vast and insurmountable, had closed. They had fought side by side, and now they stood together not just as allies, but as partners in a future they would build together. The next few days were a blur of activity. The human fleet had been reinforced by Relari ships, and together they moved through the galaxy, visiting various planets and stations that had once been under Vraxian control. The message was clear. The war was over, but the fight for peace had just begun. Zarathis and Rafe traveled from one world to the next, meeting with leaders, discussing terms, and offering an olive branch to those who had once been their enemies. It was not easy. Many species were hesitant to trust the humans or the Relari, but with each passing day, Zarathis and Rafe proved their sincerity. They weren't just leaders of a coalition, they were symbols of hope. Symbols of the possibility for unity in a galaxy that had known nothing but war for centuries. One day, as they arrived at a small, isolated planet on the edge of the galaxy, Zarathis stood on the bridge of the human flagship, looking out at the planet below. It was a quiet world, unremarkable to most, but to the people who lived there it was everything. It had been under Vraxian control for decades, its people oppressed and beaten down. Now it was free, but there was still work to be done. Rafe joined her at the window, his presence a comforting weight at her side. "What are you thinking?" he asked, his voice low. Zarathis didn't look at him, her eyes still fixed on the planet. "I'm thinking about all the worlds that are still suffering. About all the people who are still under the thumb of those who would use them as pawns." "And what are we going to do about it?" Rafe asked, his voice filled with quiet determination. "We'll keep fighting," Zarathis said softly. "We'll keep fighting until every corner of the galaxy knows that they are free." Rafe smiled, a look of admiration in his eyes. "That's the spirit I've come to admire." The shuttle descended toward the planet's surface, and the two of them prepared to make history once again. As they stepped off the shuttle, they were met by a small group of local leaders, their faces wary but hopeful. It was clear that they had seen many false promises in their time, and trust would not come easily. But Zarathis and Rafe were prepared to earn it. The meeting was long, filled with negotiations and difficult conversations, but by the end of it, a new agreement had been reached. The people of the planet would join the new coalition, and in exchange, they would be guaranteed protection and support. The first step had been taken. As they left the meeting, Zarathis and Rafe stood together, watching the sun set over the horizon. It was a small victory, but it was a victory nonetheless. They had taken another step toward the future they had dreamed of. "Do you think they'll come around?" Rafe asked, his voice thoughtful. "They have to," Zarathis replied. "If they don't, then we'll show them why they should." Rafe chuckled. "I like the sound of that." The two of them stood in silence for a moment, taking in the view. The galaxy was still a vast and dangerous place, filled with threats both known and unknown. But for the first time in a long time, Zarathis felt a sense of hope. They had made it this far, and they would continue to fight, for the future, for the galaxy, for each other. And as the stars above them twinkled, Zarathis knew that the dawn of a new era had begun.